Imagine you're speedrunning a game like Banjo-Kazooie, and you keep getting random game crashes, like this one. Or this one. Or this one. These kind of crashes were pretty rare, and for the longest time speedrunners saw it as an annoying problem that couldn't be solved, and we sort of moved on. But little did we know it would lead to one of the most interesting glitch discoveries in Banjo-Kazooie. This is the 8-Bit Beast, and welcome to Glitches Explained, where today we'll look at the Jiggy Despawn glitch in Banjo-Kazooie. Now you might not have heard of these crashes before, and that's probably because these crashes never happen to runners of the most popular categories. And that's pretty much because in those categories you're doing the same route over and over. But it did start happening when we explored new categories and started coming up with new routes. In particular, Sandcastle Percent on the Xbox. It always seemed to happen when we got the Frazizi Peak Pipe Jiggy. And it seemed up to luck whether the game would crash or continue on as normal. Until one day, it didn't do either of those things. This is a clip of me running Sandcastle Percent on Xbox back in 2018, and at this point in time we were coming across the game crash quite a lot with that Jiggy. So luckily I grabbed the Jiggy in this run and the game didn't crash, and I actually mentioned earlier in this video, thank goodness it didn't crash, that was obviously on my mind at the time. Notice the Mumbo token there around that leg though. So something very weird happened. There's a Mumbo token around each leg, but for some reason the other Mumbo token was missing here. I'll let you hear my reaction.
Why isn't a Mumbo token there? What?
So this was pretty unusual. The game usually either crashed or continued on as normal, but in this case, an object in the level disappeared, but we didn't think too much of this at the time. Part of the reason I didn't investigate it is because I thought at the time it was an Xbox exclusive glitch, but it turns out that it's not. This brings us to our next part of the story in a runner named King KC. I only despawned a Mumbo token, but King KC was playing on N64 and despawned something much more important. Let's have a look. King KC grabs the Jiggy there and goes through the door. And there's no note door there. Then he comes back out, and the note door comes back. This is getting pretty weird. So I won't keep you waiting, we're going to get stuck straight into how this glitch works. This is an example level where Banjo is there with 2 snippets and a Jiggy, and all the objects are stored in the object array there, which keeps track of all the important stuff about them. Let's do an example where Banjo is going to kill this first snippet by ground pounding onto it. Now that snippet will go away and spawn 2 health. What's going to happen is the snippet goes away from the object array, and a health will spawn in its spot, and since there's 2 health, another object is created, which is that second honeycomb there. This is what our new object array looks like. Let's suppose instead that Banjo goes up and grabs this Jiggy. So this is where we need to talk about the Jiggy Jig routine. So what actually happens is we pick the Jiggy index and store it. So the game says it might delete this later. Second is we actually delete the Jiggy Jig object itself. So Banjo completes the Jiggy Jig and Kazooie eats it, and then the Jiggy sort of goes away. Now the Jiggy is still stored in that object slot, but it's not there anymore, and if we come back into the room it still won't be there. The Jiggy is essentially just gone, and that's how the whole game works, and it all works as intended. So now let's take this concept into practice. You can see here I'm essentially in our example room. There's 2 snippets hanging out here and a Jiggy. There's also a few other objects like water droplets and so on. All the objects that I've got are in the bottom right of the screen there, and this is on a program called BizHawk using something called ScriptHawk, which is really useful for looking at this stuff. So you can see what's going to happen with all the objects here, and we'll run through our example where I would ground pound the snippet. If I do that, you can see the snippet turns into a honeycomb, and then sort of towards the bottom of the object array another honeycomb spawns. This stuff's going on pretty normally. We'll see when I grab the Jiggy itself, it's going to change to a Jiggy in hand object in slot 6, and then it'll still sort of be there once I'm done. So the Jiggy in hand is hanging out all around, but the actual Jiggy itself has disappeared. So essentially the game's done what it's supposed to do. Now the way the game keeps track of the Jiggy object is this little index called Jiggy grabbed, which you can see on the left there. I'm going to blow it up a bit bigger so you don't have to look at that small writing. It's down the bottom there, and it currently says nil because we have not grabbed a Jiggy. As soon as I do grab a Jiggy, what's going to happen is that'll change to 1098E0, which if you look on the object array, that is the address of the Jiggy. So it's sort of pointing to where that Jiggy is in memory, and the game's storing, yep, we're going to delete object 3 once this Jiggy jig is done. So let's see what happens. Eat the Jiggy, delete object 3, Jiggy grabbed goes back to nil. But something really interesting happens if you never end up completing this Jiggy jig. For example, if you die when grabbing the Jiggy. Let's have a look. So I'm going to come and grab this Jiggy here and fall straight onto the crab. You can see Jiggy grabbed has updated and it's never actually going to clear itself out. Let's have a look. So Banjo respawns and the address stays the same. The object list blows up because we're in Treasure Trove Cove, but you can see I've still got Jiggy grabbed being 109B80. And that is not supposed to happen at all. So you might be wondering, what happens if we just go and grab a Jiggy right now? Well, let's see. So Banjo grabs the Jiggy, the index updates, he does the Jiggy jig, and then it completes as normal, and sets back to 0. There's like nothing interesting at all, so this glitch really doesn't do anything. Now the reason nothing interesting happened before is because when we grabbed the Jiggy and started the Jiggy jig, it updated the index to point to the correct object. So I pointed towards the correct Jiggy and that deleted it all normally. But what happens if we never start a Jiggy jig? What if we grab the Jiggy while flying and Banjo never actually does the dance? Let's have a look. And this is where we get our fabled game crash. The game is trying to delete object number 328. There are only 115 objects in this level. As a result, the game crashes. But consider this, what if instead of pointing to object 328, the game was actually pointing to object 32, which just so happens to be this lighthouse. Let's see what happens. Ooh, this game just got broken. Now at this point you might be wondering, if I was just going to despawn object 6 when I grab this Jiggy, why on earth can I be then despawning object number 32 when I step back out into Treasure Trove Cove? Now the answer for this is pretty complex for this video, but I will give a brief rundown. I'll link a link to a document which explains it in much more detail than what I'm about to do here. But essentially where that comes from is that the game's memory jumps around a lot. You can see the objects in this area are sort of in the region of 167-ish, but back in the sandcastle, they were in 109-ish. So because they change around so much, that's why when pointing to a particular address, you might not get a particular object. In fact, the object will actually keep jumping around after you die. Even if I leave Treasure Trove Cove here with the object pointing at 32, when I come out, it'll be pointing at object 1, which is the gruntling up there. If we pull up the memory viewer for the entire game, we can see what's going on here. The Nintendo 64 has a lot of RAM, especially if you have the expansion pack. But this is the address 109A60, which is where that index is pointing to. If we go down to, and then across a little bit to this address here, we get 00A0, and that's sort of pointing to which index we're talking about. It's a bit complicated how this number maps to the number 6, but essentially if we keep increasing this, we can actually change it so that instead of mapping to number 6, we're mapping to number 7 instead, which is the shadow. So in theory, if I complete that Jiggy dance now, I shouldn't despawn the Jiggy, I should despawn the shadow. But let's do it with something a bit more interesting. Maybe we'll come all the way back down to object number 2, which is a snippet, and we'll have a look at what happens here. If I now complete the Jiggy jig, then hopefully it should despawn the snippet. And there we go. Pretty weird stuff. So one weird implication of this is that Banjo actually eats the snippet there, and if we actually let the dance continue, we can see the Jiggy still sort of sitting there on the floor uneaten. This is not a Jiggy that we can collect though, it's a Jiggy in hand object, but if we sort of have a look there, you can see the Jiggy's still sitting down there because it never actually despawned. In fact, just by editing the memory values, you can make Banjo and Kazooie eat pretty much anything you want. Just make sure you don't take it too far though, otherwise Kazooie might eat something she regrets. But that's all with memory hacking, so let's get back to what we can do in the actual game. Now that we've seen how this glitch works, we can understand why the game used to crash all the time during Xbox Sandcastle %. We used to grab this Jiggy here in the route, but we did it straight after doing Treasure Trove Cove. Now, Treasure Trove Cove ends by death warping on a Jiggy in Nipper, that Jiggy we were looking at before, and this was the very next Jiggy we got. You grab it while flying to skip the Jiggy dance, and more often than not, the object index is pointing to an object that doesn't exist. There's only 69 objects in this level, so anything higher than that would cause the game to crash. And that example that I showed you before with the Mumbo token, well, it was pointing to the Mumbo token object. In theory, anything could have possibly despawned. And so all we needed to do was change up the route a little bit. We actually did the levels in a different order, I think, and then it solved our problem. So understanding this glitch sort of helped us avoid that awful game crash that was killing so many runs. Now that we've seen some examples, let's go over what's actually needed to get a Jiggy despawn glitch in practice. The very first thing you need to do is die with a Jiggy in your hand, and that sets the game thinking you're carrying the Jiggy. This works along with also getting a Jiggy in the demo sequence. If you press start at the right time, it still thinks you're holding the Jiggy that you were holding in the demo, so that can also work. The next thing that you need to do is get the next Jiggy without getting a dance. Now this could be done through swimming, flying, or being a transformation like the bee or the pumpkin or something. In fact, if you think about it, there is one other transformation that could be useful for doing this. Let's not worry about that too much now because it takes way too long to get that. Last thing you need to do is get very lucky. It could be pointing to pretty much any object, and if you want to despawn a particular one, you're going to have to get extremely lucky there, and it's not really something you can do predictably in an RTA speedrun. Now, as soon as you grab a Jiggy normally again, this glitch is cleared, so every time you want to do it, you want to make sure the very last Jiggy that you actually did with the dance, you grabbed and died with it in your hand. So you really want to make these count when you do them. If we come back to our King KC clip from before, we can see this is exactly what happened. King KC died before, grabbed this Jiggy with the B, which means that he didn't get a dance, went through the door, and the 765 door had despawned, because that was the object that the game was pointing at the time. Fun fact, if you do come back into the room, it does come back, so that's how he could tell that something was wrong there. So now we're going to have a look at some practical examples. We already saw King KC with their example of despawning the 765 note door, and that would actually be useful in something like an Xbox speedrun if the 810 skip was possible, because you would want to get past the 765 door without opening it. In this example, we've just gotten that Jiggy as the termite on top of the mountain there, and we've despawned the 50 note door. So if we make our way up there as Banjo, we should hopefully see that 50 note door is no longer there, and it's a very similar thing to what King KC has done. This could be something very practical, and you could imagine some routes or miscategories where this could be useful. You go through the 50 note door, and if you were to come back out, you would notice that the 50 note door is actually still there, and I only have 8 notes, so there's no way I could have possibly opened it and got through. Another example here is going to be in the lair for Frazizi Peak, and this one would actually be useful in a speedrun route. We can see that level there is closed here, but if we fly up here and get this Jiggy, you can actually just beak bomb into the door and grab the Jiggy. But we've just done a Jiggy despawn. What have we despawned? Well, half the door to Frazizi Peak. So that's just gone and you can head straight in. This actually would be quicker than doing FP earlier and also grabbing the Jiggy, but only if you needed the Jiggy. So when we were making the Taz a very long time ago, we actually needed to do this, and we spent a long time trying to figure out how to line up the despawn because it's very difficult to get the memory to work. It was only going to save 6 or 7 seconds, but it put the Taz on hold for a really long time because we just flat out couldn't figure it out. As a result, I ended up figuring a way to get the Jiggy above FP while still staying out of bounds, and that meant that the despawn ended up being slower in the end. And the whole reason I was searching so hard for that trick is because I didn't want to have to figure out how to do the despawn in practice. One kind of cool example is the Gobi's Valley door. So we commonly get this Jiggy in like an any % run as the B or something like that. And if you do it right, you can actually despawn the door to Gobi's Valley. So that was sitting there before and now it's just completely gone. That's a little bit faster to get into Gobi's Valley than it is to go through the top. But honestly, given it only saves maybe 1 or 2 seconds, it's not really worth going for in a run, especially since you can flat out crash the game if you get it wrong. Now you can actually get this Jiggy with Banjo-Kazooie as well, and it would save time in a 100% run to grab this Jiggy and despawn the Gobi's Valley door, since that would actually save you opening the level. Unfortunately, when you do grab this Jiggy, you get a Jiggy dance and the despawn glitch doesn't work, because remember, to do the despawn glitch you actually need to get the Jiggy without a dance. Now we could actually come in here with the washing machine, and when the washing machine grabs a Jiggy, it doesn't do a dance, so in theory we can despawn the Gobi's Valley door. Unfortunately, the washing machine's hitbox is different, and it actually can't grab this Jiggy through the sarcophagus. You'd have to open it normally. So we really can't win with this. We can grab the Jiggy with Banjo, doesn't work. We can't grab the Jiggy with the washing machine, even though it would work. But with all these washing machine skips, you'd have to go through the whole bottles bonus sequence anyway, so it would take much longer than what you save. The washing machine can do some unique despawns though, like this one here where you grab the Jiggy and you set up so that the 260 note door despawns. This would actually be pretty useful in getting through the lair, especially in something like a save 2D run or something like that. But again, it would be a lot quicker to actually enter the cheat code for opening the 260 note door or even to collect 260 notes than it would be to use the washing machine. But as we can see, we can make it through this 260 note door, and then if we go back through, it'll be back there. So pretty interesting stuff. Now you might be noticing a really unfortunate theme here, that these glitches either take way too long to set up or they're not useful at all. But I'm going to show you here the one use that I actually know of in a speedrun route, and this is in the A button challenge by That Cow Guy. The goal of this challenge is to reduce pressing A as much as possible, and it was popularized in games such as Super Mario 64 where a lot of science goes into it. Banjo-Kazooie has a similar challenge, and I'd highly recommend checking out these videos if you haven't seen them. But That Cow Guy is about to despawn this house right here. They've despawned it just before, and the result of it is that you don't have to press A to jump over the house anymore. This saves an A press. And in the A button challenge, no matter how long it takes, it's always worth spending time to save an A press, because saving A presses is the main goal there. So that, in my opinion, is one of the absolute coolest A press saves in this challenge, and it's all thanks to this object despawn glitch. I'm actually really amazed that That Cow Guy pulled it off, given how hard it is to manipulate the object slots in memory. Now we've seen some pretty straightforward applications of this glitch, but I want to touch on one really unique and weird aspect of it. So far we've seen despawning objects and they just go away, but if you leave the room, reload it and come back, the objects do actually come back as well. We've seen that in the case with the note door. But something really interesting happens if you despawn a gruntling. Let's despawn that one over there, and then we're going to leave the room, come back and see what happens. So we'll fly back up to where this gruntling is here, and then all of a sudden it's just doing that, which is pretty weird. It seems to be copying the animation of some other object or something along those lines, but it's pretty glitched out and pretty corrupted. This glitch just got really interesting. So I searched around for another interesting application like this, and this is pretty much the most interesting one I found. It's Brentilda. We can despawn Brentilda by grabbing this Jiggy up here, and then if we fly back to where Brentilda was, we'll see that she's actually not there. Nothing much interesting happens because she's just gone, you can't talk to her or anything. But something very interesting happens if you then leave the room and come back in. Let's go back and see Brentilda now. And the game just completely crashes for whatever reason. Pretty bizarre. In fact, it seems to be whenever it tries to render Brentilda on screen that this happens. The crash doesn't always look like this. Sometimes I got a crash like this, which was a screen which is messed up. What if I told you this glitch gets even weirder? The version we were playing on was the US version 1.0 copy of the game, and that had Brentilda crashing when she respawned. But what if we played instead on the Japanese version of the game? Let's see what happens. So Brentilda doesn't crash the game when she respawns anymore. Instead, she's just T-posing and asserting her dominance. In fact, you can't even talk to her, and that's not just because I'm the bee. Even if you're Banjo, you can't talk to her. So this is pretty weird that the glitch is different between games, and it shows that there's a lot of depth here that we're not quite capturing. So more often than not with respawning objects, you usually get them to do weird behaviour or a game crash like the Brentilda that we saw before. Or in the case of this ticker, you can get it to just find this wall really interesting. But in my opinion, this is one of the biggest unexplored potentials of this glitch. I have checked most objects in the game, but there's always a possibility that I've missed something. So if you're looking to do some glitch hunting on your own, start despawning and respawning stuff. You never know what you could find, and it could lead to something pretty big. Who knows? There's other random stuff you can do with the glitch like this, where you despawn Boggy but then try and hit him with the sled, but I haven't found anything super useful with this kind of stuff. For some reason it puts you in a weird kind of like soft lock-ish state where your camera is locked in this position. You can still just walk around the level though, like normal. You can also do some pretty cool stuff like getting the stop and swap items without actually entering the stop and swap code. You can do this pretty easily just by despawning the door to the stop and swap room here. As you can see, that door's gone, so we can head in and grab the egg, but if we were to come out of that room, the door would be back for us. So that's a pretty weird effect of this glitch that you can do, even though there are lots of ways to get in here now. Another potential application with this glitch could be something like an arbitrary code execution. So normally the object that you delete would be an object that's actually in the level, and it just makes the object go away by flipping a bit that sort of sets it to be deleted. But there's nothing stopping you from having an object which is beyond the total list of objects in the level. For example, right now we've got object 1793. The game will crash if we grab that Jiggy. There is no object there to delete. But if there was some way that you can make the game not crash when you grabbed an out of bounds object, you never know what could happen in the game. In theory, you could flip the bit which opens the 810 note door, you never know. Now, some people who know a lot more about this game than me have looked into it, and it looks like that's not super likely, but I think there's still potential there if you could avoid a crash for something interesting to happen. Of course, the very first thing we tried when we found this glitch was skipping the 810 no door. This has been the holy grail for such a long time in Banjo speedruns, and although we have methods to get past this in a TAS, we're still very much looking for an RTA viable method. If we could skip this with a Jiggy Despawn, it would be absolutely amazing, and the 90% run would come down quite a bit. Unfortunately, there's no Jiggies anywhere in this room, so it doesn't look possible to use this glitch to help us out. But you never know with this game. This glitch could just be one big piece in a puzzle which could one day lead to 810 skip, but we'll just have to wait and see if that ends up happening. That's going to be pretty much all from me in this video. I hope you enjoyed this explanation, and I hope that maybe for some people it inspired you to have a look into how this glitch works yourself. There's a lot that can still be researched with this glitch, and there's a lot left to be found, I reckon. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.